Hello everyone, happy Friday to you, happy Fabric Friday to you. We meet a couple of Fridays a month anyway. I'm trying to adjust my camera here a little bit. But I try to come to you live a couple Fridays a month and talk to you about fabrics, about different properties of fabrics, and about different kinds of fabrics, because when you understand your fabric better, you can make your fabric work better for you. And I am having some camera issues. Let's see if we can get that right. Okay, I think that's a little bit better. Today, we're talking about a specific kind of fabric. I feel like I have talked an awful lot about properties of fabric, how fabric is made, things that they put on fabrics and that kind of thing. So today, I wanted to talk about a specific kind of fabric. And there's a reason why. We're going to talk about cotton lawn, which you may or may not have heard of before. But I have always, it's kind of my philosophy that when you're very first starting your first couple of sewing projects at least, that quilter's cotton is a great place to start, a great fabric to start with, because the properties of quilter's cotton make it behave the way you want it to. It's not going to scooch and slide on you. It's not going to do funny things when you're sewing. And so I feel like it's a really great one to start with. But there are actually different kinds of cotton fabrics that quilters use in, at least in modern quilting, when you're starting from purchased fabrics and not upcycling, that kind of thing. So just so you know, I work in a quilt shop. I had a very small exposure to quilting growing up. My mom was always quilting things and she did hand quilting. I just didn't do a lot of it with her. And so now I am working in the quilt shop and learning a lot more about quilting, but I did know that quilter's cotton is a great kind to start with. What I didn't know was how many different cottons there are that are used in quilting. So there are just traditional quilter's cottons. And so I've got this blouse on today, and this blouse that I'm working on, I had it on my dress form, so I thought I would bring it so we could talk a little bit about that briefly and then talk about cotton lawn. So typically when we get fabrics into the shop, and in any quilting shop that I've been in, they have just cotton, 100% cotton fabric, and it's always in a 1-by-1 weave, which we've talked about in the past. For every one thread going this way, there's one thread going that way. And so cotton lawn is just a variation on that, and we actually do from time to time carry it in the quilt shop, because a fabric designer will put out a line of prints that they've designed, like this particular pattern or these polka dots, and they'll put it on just the standard quilter's cotton, and then they'll put some on what is called cotton lawn. And so here's an example of that. This is a fabric that we had in the shop. We had this on just a regular quilter's cotton, and then we also got some in on the cotton lawn. And so I snatched it up to make this dress as a sample for the shop. And I'm going to tag the shop in the comments. It's Prairie Point Quilt Shop in Lenexa, Kansas. That's where I work, and that's where we had this. And I made this because we carry the pattern. I made it as a sample for the shop. But a lot of people still bought the cotton lawn for their quilts because it is a quilter's cotton, even though there's some slight differences. So let's just talk about what cotton lawn is first, and then we'll kind of compare and contrast it with just your typical quilter's cotton. So I have some notes down here just to make sure that I'm staying on track. Cotton lawn is much lighter weight than these quilting cottons. So basically speaking, if you were to take the same amount of both fabrics, one would be slightly heavier than the other. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the basic gist of it. So it's a little bit lighter weight. That is because the yarns that are woven in to the cotton, so the yarns going this way and this way, I'm not talking about knitting yarns, but the yarns or threads that the cotton lawn is made from are much finer and thinner than in your more traditional quilter's cotton. So if you were to unravel it or fray the fabric and compare the threads that came out, the ones from the cotton lawn would be much thinner. So therefore, you can still weave them tightly together in a one-to-one weave, which makes it a very stable fabric to work with, very easy, especially for beginner projects to work with. But those thinner yarns give it a softer drape, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But remember, drape is how it hangs, how the fabric hangs, or more specifically, how it hangs on the body. They also make it a little more breathable than the quilter's cotton because it's not as heavy, because it's a lighter weight. Cotton generally is a breathable fabric, but cotton lawn is going to be even more breathable. It's also more sheer. And I don't have a light to put behind them, but if I could put a light behind this fabric and then behind this fabric, you would see that this fabric is much more sheer. Not necessarily sheer. You can have a very sheer cotton lawn. But this one is not necessarily that sheer. But some cotton lawns do need to be lined. And cotton lawn is commonly used for garment making. A lot of people like it for the heirloom sewing because of its drape and the way that it gathers. So let's talk about that just a little bit. So we mentioned the drape. Because of the thinner yarns, because it is a lighter weight fabric, it drapes better, and that's why I thought it was perfect to use in this dress, because we have some nice soft gathers here. The stiffer the fabric, the more the gathers will stand up, and that's kind of why I wore this today. The stiffer fabric gives you a puffier sleeve, the more drape tends to lie down, and so these gathers here are much softer than these gathers in this ruffle here. So cotton lawn has a much nicer drape. To illustrate that, I have here the dress. If I hang it like this, you can see it's hanging in lots of folds and, folds, gathers, I guess. If I take this fabric, which is the same as this blouse, can you see how it just hangs in basically one big funnel shape here? Because it's not as soft, even though I have the same number of layers of fabric, 2 layers here, 2 layers here. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about drape. And the cotton lawn has a softer drape, which works really nicely for dresses. So that's what cotton lawn is. It is a quilter's cotton, just a much softer one that is a little more suited maybe for some clothing, but you're going to get those same benefits when you're working with it, especially as a beginner, because it is so cooperating. That's the only word I can think of to use. It will cooperate for you like a quilter's cotton would. So just a few comparisons and contrasts of the two different kind of fabric. Both cotton lawn and your more traditional quilter's cotton are 100% cotton, which is always, especially if you need natural fibers or want something for natural fibers, is always a good thing. Their drape is one thing that makes them, I'm skipping ahead in my notes and confusing myself. Both are woven and both are, like I said earlier, a one-to-one weave. Whoops, we're fraying over here. So for every one thread going this direction, there is one thread going that direction, and they are both very tightly woven. These threads are really scrunched in there together. So you have what you call a high thread count. You may have heard that when you're talking about sheets. They both have a high thread count. They're both very tightly woven. And they're both very versatile. You know, we make quilts out of these, we make bags out of these, but we can also make clothing out of them and make some really fun and nice clothing to wear, especially for warm weather climates and that kind of thing. The ways in which they're different is their weight and their feel, or the hand. So we talked about how because the cotton lawn is made from thinner yarns when it's woven, it is much lighter weight. That makes it even better for warmer weather, warm climates, that kind of thing. It also just feels softer. When I feel the fabric, this is a much crisper feel, or hand is what we call it. It has a much crisper hand than the cotton lawn. You can just kind of feel the softness of the fabric with your hand. Of course, we've talked about the drape. The cotton lawn has much more drape than the quilter's cotton. Now, that does not necessarily, oh, sorry. You know you sew when there's little threads all over everything, but that's not necessarily a bad or a good thing. It's just that the drape is different. For this particular top, I wanted a nice crisp cotton. It's going to have big puffy sleeves. It's got this ruffle on the front. But if you want softer, softer gathers, like the front of this dress, or gathers that hang just a little bit more softly, then you want something like a cotton lawn. And then finally, their opacity is the word that we use, how sheer they are, how much you can see through them. And again, that contributes to how comfortable they are for wearing. The lighter weight is usually a little more comfortable in warmer weather and warmer climates. So that is cotton lawn. So when I talk about using quilters cottons as a great beginner fabric, cotton lawn is technically a quilter's cotton. It is often sold in quilt shops. There just are some differences, advantages and disadvantages to both of them. So of course, the more you understand about that, the more you understand about your fabric, the better or the more you can make your fabric work for you and not against you in your project. So thank you so much for joining me today. I will be back again in a couple weeks to talk about another kind of fabric that can be used for both quilting and garment sewing, and that is cotton batik. So we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. Again, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you later.